Housing affordability in Canada sucks. In 2022, the average home price in Canada skyrocketed to over $800,000. But this isn't really a new problem. In fact, big cities like Toronto and Vancouver have been rated as one of the least unaffordable cities in a report released earlier this year. And of 92 markets in this report, they ranked 83 and 90th least unaffordable. So of course, people are upset. As a result, the federal government is introducing a ban on foreign ownership for Canadian real estate. But there are exceptions to this rule. Today, I'm going to share my thoughts on what is causing housing to be so unaffordable, explain what this ban is, the statistics on foreign ownership, the impact this could have on the Canadian real estate market, and my thoughts on the effectiveness of this ban. What's up, guys? My name is Felix Chan, realtor with Real Broker Canada. Okay, so this ban is formally known as the Prohibition on the Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act, and it comes into force January 1st, 2023. It prohibits the purchase of residential property in Canada by non-Canadians unless they fall under the exemptions, which I'm going to share shortly. This is meant to impact foreign home investors that don't plan on living in Canada, which affects the available inventory and drives up real estate prices for Canadians. Now, this act is only in force for 2 years. So what is the government's definition of residential property? Well, this specific act defines it as any real property that is situated in Canada, and that is a detached house or similar building containing not more than 3 dwelling units, a part of a building that is a semi-detached house, row housing unit, residential condominium unit, or other similar premises, or any prescribed real property or immovable. Who's exempt from this? Some people who are exempt from this ban can be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada or an accepted refugee. Now, some other residents under a student or work visa may also be exempt. If you are buying a property in co-ownership with your Canadian citizen or permanent resident spouse, if you're purchasing a multiplex consisting of 3 dwellings or more, if you are purchasing a commercial usage property, so for an example, an office space or retail store, or if you just signed a purchase contract with a vendor prior to January 1st, 2023. So you better get on it. Now, it says you must have a signed purchase contract, but I would make sure that the deal is firm, meaning you've submitted your waiver for all conditions. And lastly, the property is situated in recreational areas that can only be used for vacation purposes. What happens if you don't comply with this prohibition? Well, the government can't stop you from purchasing property because they just don't know about the purchase in real time. But you, as the buyer, or anyone or any entity that helps, aids, or counsels the purchase of a property can be fined of no more than $10,000. As a Canadian and an investor, a Canadian investor, this is cool. I like it because my dollar can go further if real estate prices stayed at reasonable prices. But my question when this first came out was, if this is a ban on foreign ownership, then what percentage of ownership of the Canadian real estate market do foreigners actually have? I dug into the stats and you're gonna be pretty surprised what it actually is. More on that later, but first, so the government is doing this to curb soaring housing costs, but why is housing so unaffordable, which is really in 2 cities of all of Canada, and why is housing, so expensive to begin with? Let's dive into that. Housing affordability. Now, according to an analysis in 10 Canadian metropolitan centers done by the National Bank Financial Markets in August 2022, the housing market in Canada had its biggest drop in affordability in 41 years during the Q2 of 2022. Affordability deteriorated in all 10 markets that it tracked, and it was the worst in Vancouver, Victoria, and Calgary. Ottawa, Gatineau, Hamilton, and Winnipeg actually had the least deterioration. Canada is currently going through a long stretch of deteriorating affordability since the real estate bubble of the 1980s. The cost to own a home in Canada requires 67% of income to service that debt, the most since 1981. Why is housing so expensive in Canada? Well, this is a very common question. Housing is a very complex issue with a lot of contributing factors. There's really no clear solution to housing affordability, but I'm gonna try and explain it as best as I can from my perspective. I think it comes down to three main reasons. The first is zoning. Up until recently, the typical Canadian or American zoning favors single family homes, which features separate areas from commercial spaces. The few areas that did allow multifamily homes to be built ended up being like condos or large towers. There wasn't a lot of middle ground in between. Single family home development leads to low density sprawl, meaning cities build out versus building up. And as a result, commutes now become longer distances alongside inefficient transit. Number two is the supply gap. The supply is just simply not keeping up with demand. Now, this is an ongoing issue with every type of home, not just new builds. The vast majority of the gap is centered among Canada's most densely populated areas like Vancouver and Toronto. The supply is low because of a combination of restrictive zoning, difficult municipal and provincial laws around building new homes, and some of the other reasons are difficulty getting projects approved, properties that are being held as speculative investments, and land available for development is usually far from areas of employment. Number three, demand. Demand was very high for a long period of time because of low interest rates from banks, which lowers the monthly payments, and so prices end up going up. There's also immigration and the use of housing as a financial opportunity. This includes everything from buying a home to list it on Airbnb, leaving it vacant, long-term rentals, or flippers renovating properties and increasing market price. What are the stats of foreign real estate ownership in Canada? Data in 2020 shows that foreign owners only owned a very small share of the housing stock. So for example, and get this guys, in Ontario, they own 2.2% of homes. In BC, it's 3.1%. Toronto and Vancouver are at around 2%. So it's not a lot. What's interesting is that new data from the Canadian Housing Statistics Program show that over 1 in 10 of Canada's non-resident homeowners own several Canadian properties. So to summarize, about 3.5% of homeowners in Canada are non-residents, or about 340,000 owners. Will this ban affect Calgarians and Alberta? Well, of course I have to speak to this since we're based here in Calgary. Calgary does not see a trend of out-of-country investors buying Calgary properties that remain vacant. Yes, there are out-of-country people buying homes in Calgary because our team helps them out, but most of them either leave it empty for a few months or they rent it out for a short period of time and then they have intentions to move in, and they do. However, Calgary has been seeing a trend of other provinces making offers on Calgary homes. There are people who are moving here because of the low cost of living, or they're investors. What are the potential outcomes of this prohibition? Now, this act could cool off a hot housing market and give more opportunities for Canadians and first-time homebuyers. If the housing market actually cools off because of this, then we will only see 2 years of relief, since this is in effect for a time period until the end of 2024. Or, since the percentage of foreign ownership is less than 4%, it doesn't do anything. What are my thoughts on this prohibition? Well, looking at the statistics and seeing the low percentage of foreign ownership of Canadian real estate, which is 3.5%, I'm having a really tough time wrapping my head around foreign owners driving up price significantly. Now, of course, could the percentage be actually higher than that, than what's reported? Certainly. even if the real amount was say 10%, would that be big enough of an impact to drive up price just from a small percentage of foreign owners? I would say, it could have a small impact, but it wouldn't be the main driver of soaring prices. Plus, if foreign buyers had such a tight grip on prices, then why has Vancouver and Toronto dropped off the cliff for both sales and pricing since February of this year? I think the ban only affects more transient markets where there's more of an international presence with a bigger population like Vancouver and Toronto. What drives real estate prices, just like stock prices, is fear and FOMO, fear of missing out, and greed. So what kind of foreigners are actually buying properties in Canada? The answer is simple: immigrants, international students, and expats, most of which intend to live in the property they are purchasing as they're already in the process of acquiring their citizenship in Canada. I think the silver lining of this ban may finally convince Canadians that foreign buyers are not actually the cause of high soaring real estate prices, but net migration, an imbalance of supply and demand, and policy. Now, it's up to local municipalities and policymakers on how much friction there is to rezoning established communities to allow more densification, and they must reduce the red tape to gentrify existing areas. I think time will tell how big of an impact this ban will have on Canadian real estate prices. So what are your guys' thoughts on this ban and the impact it'll have on real estate prices? Do you agree that foreign buyers are responsible for driving up prices after hearing the actual statistics? Could they own a much higher percentage of Canadian real estate, but we just don't know? Would love to hear your inputs in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. My name is Felix Chan, Calgary realtor and mortgage broker with Real Broker Canada, and we'll see you in the next video.